Hi guys, Sam here. Welcome to my first video where I'll be breaking down my custom rating system, the foundation for all of my deep dive game analysis. My goal is to have a deeper discussion about games as a contrast to the shorter, spoiler free reviews that we generally watch before we buy something, by deeply analyzing games using my rating system. These videos will contain spoilers as I'll also be discussing the story, but this particular video is spoiler free. Now, in these videos, I'll go through the subcategories of various game elements, discussing them and rating them out of 10 to get an overall score for that game. But first, I'd like to give an explanation of my process, the system, how I understand each subcategory, as well as provide an example of which game excels in each area. But first, how exactly did I end up doing this? Well, boredom. At some point in the last year or so, I made a list of all the games that I've played, ranking them from best to worst. Then I wondered what it was exactly that made these games so good for me. And so I started to break it down with elements of objectivity whilst keeping it reflective of my subjective preferences. So I came up with the following six core elements of why I enjoy games: world, visual, story, sound, technical, and gameplay. Now, of course, these elements aren't all equal, so I assigned them different percentages of the overall score. And as you can see, story and gameplay are the most important to me, each contributing 18%. And this is because they're just the reason why I play games. If there's no story or there's no good gameplay, then there's just not really a game there. Now, the other elements, the visual, sound, technical, and the world, are obviously crucial, but they establish the experience rather than being the sole reason to play. So, how do I score each element? Well, I came up with subcategories for each one and gave them a percentage of that element's score, similarly to how each element has a percentage of the overall score. So, for example, the element story is made up of six subcategories, which each contribute a different percentage based on its importance. Then, using the notes that I take whilst playing a game, I give each subcategory a score out of 10, which then gives me the score for that element, which contributes to the overall score. Now, different people or publications tend to have different understandings of what each score out of 10 actually means. So, I'd like to explain how I use them. And I just want to note that I want it to actually mean something when I give a high score. I don't just want to be handing them out like candy to everyone. So at the top, there's 10 out of 10, which is the benchmark. Now, I don't believe in perfect, but this is as close as it gets. The game sets the standard in this subcategory. 9.5 is exceptional. Only the smallest of things are preventing this game from setting the standard. 9 is outstanding. The game is extremely strong and gives a wow feeling throughout. 8.5 is excellent, significantly above average, but with wow moments that aren't sustained. 8 is great, mate. Clearly above average, perhaps something that's simple but excellently executed, or ambitious and done well. 7.5 is very good, above average, but with enough weaknesses to not quite stand out. 7 is good, solid, but with noticeable weaknesses. 6 is satisfactory, just good enough, but with quite a bit of room for improvement. 5 is sufficient. There are frustrations, but just enough strengths to get away with it. 4 is deficient. Fun is only possible with significant limitations. 3 is bad. It's clearly subpar with frustration dominating. 2 is very bad. Almost unplayable or extremely frustrating. And finally, 1 is abysmal. A complete failure or unfinished. There's just no redemption. So now I'll go through each of the six elements by outlining their subcategories and giving a prime example for each one. First up is world with six subcategories, and these are world building, the atmosphere and immersion, detail, world logic, exploration, and environmental storytelling. So the world building is worth 25% and consists of the physical and social creation of the game world. The physical world obviously refers to the area where you play the game, whereas the social world covers culture, law, social structures, anything contributing to the game world that isn't physical. The prime examples for physical world building would be both Horizon games because of the variety of environments that are beautiful, interesting, and all fit well together. In terms of the social world building, it's the Mass Effect trilogy for the richness of the lore, the culture, the politics, the different alien species, and how all these components work together to create the world. The next subcategory is atmosphere and immersion, worth 20%, which looks at whether the world really sucks me in. Now, this can be thanks to its lighting, sounds, architecture, weather, the liveliness, etc., etc. The question is whether I feel like I'm there. And a good example of this is Elden Ring. Its world, with all the different regions, has such a richness and a density that's entirely captivating wherever you are. The third subcategory is detail, worth 15%. And here I look for things that make the world feel real or lived in. These can be physical, such as items or objects laying around, or, say, the density of natural environments. But they can also be social, such as how NPCs behave or interact with each other. And the best example here is, unsurprisingly, Red Dead Redemption 2, which is just famous for its genuinely insane level of detail. Next up is World Logic, also worth 15%. And the key here is whether the world has its own rhythms, cycles, and rules that make it feel like a real place that would exist regardless of the player. A world that is independent and self sustaining is much more immersive than a world tailored to play convenience because it forces you to adapt to it rather than it being adapted to you. This feeling is helped, for example, by shops having opening hours or NPCs having daily routines, and is diminished by shops that are permanently open with their owners never moving from the one spot. This is best shown in, again, Red Dead Redemption 2, but also both Kingdom Come Deliverance games. In all of these, you can actually follow NPCs in their daily lives, and you experience a world that almost doesn't care whether you're there or not. The second last subcategory is exploration, worth 15%, which covers the incentive and desire to explore. This can be thanks to engaging places or regional differences in the map, various secrets to discover, interesting POIs, and so on. Now, my prime example here is Baldur's Gate 3. The different areas of the maps are all interesting and generally have something hidden. If you see a path going somewhere, you probably want to follow it because there's always something to find at the end. And last up in the element world is the environmental storytelling, worth 10%. And this is about whether the world tells its own story, be it through its design or the places or items within it, which can be signs of violence or rituals, abandoned places, symbols, etc. A top example of this is Elden Ring, where the story is told almost exclusively through the world, its sights, and the items that you find along the way. The next core element is visual, which has four subcategories: style and art direction, graphic quality, immersion and coherence, and cinematography. First up is style and art direction, worth 35%. Artistic vision and uniqueness of style are what gives a game its visual identity. Games are an art form, and I love to see creativity. There are many great examples of this, but here I'll mention Disco Elysium, which has a very unique painting like style, which is immediately recognizable. Next is the graphic quality, worth 25%. This is about the quality of the assets, the textures, the lighting, and the resolution of the game. Now, 10 hasn't really been possible for me yet because I've been playing on a base PlayStation 5 and was therefore quite limited by the hardware. But that's about to change. Anyway, the most graphically impressive game that I've played until now is Cyberpunk 2077. Particularly the character models blow me away every time. I can still picture Judy laying on my lap and, looking into her eyes is like, it's scary. Like how real that was genuinely shook me. The third subcategory is immersion and coherence, also worth 25%, and which looks at whether the graphic elements support the immersion within a game. Now, some things that will break my immersion are overly reused assets, repetitive character models, weird lighting, things that make the game look too gamey. And incoherence often comes from UI, HUD, or just other elements that stand out for not fitting into the style of the game. A good example of immersive and coherent visuals comes from Cyberpunk 2077, which just works as a coherent piece of art and has menus and HUD elements that not only fit into but also contribute to the vibe. And the last subcategory is cinematography, worth 15%. And this is about the use of camera, light, and sound to create moments and emotions, as well as the cinematic quality of any cutscenes. Now, at the moment, my prime example of this is Ghost of Tsushima, just because every duel feels like a samurai film, and framing, wide shots, and other techniques are all used very intentionally and very well to convey different emotions within the story. Next up, we have the story with six subcategories: characters, main story, storytelling, side quests, writing, and gameplay integration. So, first, the characters, worth 25%. For me, the characters are the most important story element of a game because you spend all your time with them, and the story is often told through their experiences. Baldur's Gate 3, the Mass Effect trilogy, and The Witcher 3 all have my favorite characters within video games, and reaching the end of them really gave me the sinking feeling of having to say goodbye to good friends. The next subcategory is the main story, and it's worth 20%. The story is one of the main reasons why I play any game. I'm looking for a story that has a bit of thematic originality, and that, at the end of the day, leaves an emotional impression on me. What I don't want are cliches, such as the typical hero's journey to save the world. It's overdone and it's predictable. Now, there are a lot of good stories out there, but amongst my favorites are the Mass Effect trilogy and The Witcher 3. Both are brilliant. They just take you on a journey, and they left me feeling utterly empty at the end. After finishing Mass Effect 3, I was not okay for several days. Next up is storytelling, worth 20%. It's not only important that a story is good, but also that it's told well. So I look at the pacing and the structure of the story, as well as the various storytelling mechanics that are used, such as flashbacks, dialogue choices, multiple protagonists. My prime example for storytelling is, again, the Mass Effect trilogy. And a big reason for this is that you're the co author of this story, which increases your emotional investment. You build up relationships over 3 games, and the pacing and the structure from the first to the last is fantastic. The first game establishes the world and the lore. The second one strengthens your bond with all of these fantastic characters. And the third brings it all to a painfully emotional conclusion. Next are the side quests, worth 15%. These are important because they flesh out the world and the characters within it. I want content that's narratively interesting and impactful. I don't want filler. And when I think of good side quests, I think immediately of The Witcher 3. They impact the world around you, they're full of moral grey zones, and quite simply, they tell really good stories. The second last subcategory is writing, worth 15%. And good writing is important because it creates the characters and communicates the story. The best writing that I've experienced is Disco Elysium. You could skip playing and just read a manuscript of that game, and it would still be extremely entertaining. And the last subcategory in story is gameplay integration, worth 5%, where I look at how gameplay and story are intertwined and impact each other. Essentially, how the game leverages gameplay mechanics to tell the story. Now, examples of this can be active dialogue choices or making the important story moments playable instead of just cutscenes. And this is relevant because actively taking part in the story increases its emotional impact, and it's what separates games from film. 2 games that do this particularly well are both The Last of Us, the first one, and Plague Tale Requiem. for reasons that I won't explain because spoilers. Moving on to the next core element, sound. Here are the 5 subcategories: score, environmental sounds, voice acting, sound effects, and mixing. First up is the score, worth 30%. The soundtrack of a game plays a big role in creating emotion within scenes, as well as setting a mood whilst you're traveling throughout the world. My favorite music is in The Witcher 3. It changes based on the region to reflect the mood of where you are, whether it's the bleakness of Valen or the Vikingness of Skellige, and the sound itself is simply legendary. Then there's the environmental sound, worth 20%. Whether the sounds of nature or the bustle of a city, it's crucial for immersion that a place doesn't sound jarringly empty or lifeless, particularly when it doesn't add up with what you're seeing on your screen. A really strong example of this that actually caught me by surprise were the sounds of nature in the first Kingdom Come Deliverance. Walking through the wilderness, the sound of the bugs, the trickling of the water, and the various wildlife had a density to it that made me feel as though I was there. The third subcategory, voice acting, which is worth 20%, is obviously important for creating good characters and conveying their personalities. Even the best lines of dialogue won't hit if they aren't well delivered. The best voice acting I've experienced is definitely Disco Elysium. The voicing of the various moods and also of the characters in that game is both completely unhinged and dramatically poetic. It's really something that needs to be experienced. Next up are the sound effects, worth 15%. These are important for adding another level of detail to a game. Whether it be footsteps on different surfaces, casting magic, or whacking things with a sword, varied and rich sounds give these actions another depth. A top example here is The Last of Us 2. Killing someone in that game sounds about as gruesome and haunting as it probably is. And the last subcategory in sound is the mixing, worth 15%. The sound needs to be balanced. You don't want music drowning out dialogue or lines becoming inexplicably quiet, and good 3D audio is crucial for giving you a sense of space within the world. Ghost of Tsushima is a game that implements this fantastically. The sense not only of direction, but also of distance from the 3D audio is extremely helpful. I mean, you can pinpoint exactly when and from what direction an arrow will hit you just from the sound alone. So the second last element is technical, which has 4 subcategories: performance, stability and bugs, polish, and use of hardware. Performance is worth 35% and is about how well a game runs. Having a game that runs well is crucial to enjoyment. A low or stuttering frame rate isn't nice to look at, and popping can be an immersion breaking slap in the face. I also don't want to be spending my time staring at loading screens. Now, performance is most important to me because these are issues that are generally present from start to finish of a game and therefore have the biggest impact on your experience. The second subcategory is stability and bugs, worth 30%, and which covers crashes, glitches, and, well, bugs. Now, this is slightly less important than performance because these issues tend to be occasional occurrences, but they do have the potential to ruin your session. Next is polish, worth 25%. I want to play games that look like they've been given the final touch, a nice squeaky clean polish. Signs that this isn't the case could be clipping, collision issues, poorly set triggers, and generally things that make the game look just a little bit sloppy. Good polishing is literally the cherry on top. The last subcategory here is the use of hardware, worth 10%. This is simply about whether a game makes the most out of the hardware that I played it on, whether it be my PlayStation 5 or my PC. So, optimization and use of controller features are important here. I want to get the most out of my hardware and feel the weight of a sword or the tension of a bow in my controller. So, now the last of the core elements, which is the gameplay with 6 subcategories: fun, mechanics, controls, freedom and decision making, progression, and difficulty. First up, the fun, worth 20%. And this is simple. How much fun did I have? Now, I've had a good time in a lot of games, but one of the highlights is Cyberpunk 2077. Whether it's hacking enemies as a netrunner, blasting them with a shotgun, or invisibly dashing around in slow time, slicing off limbs with my mantis blades, it never gets old. Next is mechanics, also worth 20%. Mechanics are gameplay, combat, stealth, crafting, economy, or some other interaction with the world. These are the systems that shape your experience. Baldur's Gate 3 has brilliant mechanics. I love systemic elements because they allow you to interact with the world on a higher level and get creative in approaching different situations. Being able to stack boxes to gain height advantage or stick your sword in a candle to set it on fire are great examples of this. Then there's controls worth 15%. You don't want to play a game with unintuitive or frustrating controls. It's a recipe for a bad time and it can distract from the fun that you're meant to be having. An example for bad controls is the Mass Effect trilogy. Hiding behind cover and also vaulting was an absolute nightmare and led to some very frustrating deaths. On the other hand, Ghost of Tsushima nailed the controls. Everything felt fluid and intuitive, so I didn't even have to think about it and could just keep my focus on slicing up Mongols. Next up is freedom and decision making, worth 15%, which covers how much freedom the game gives you, whether it be different gameplay approaches or the ability to make different decisions. Now, not every game tries to give the player a lot of freedom, and that's absolutely fine. So, in those cases, I just give a neutral rating. The best example of freedom in games is, again, Baldur's Gate 3, due to the sheer amount of class combinations available, the decisions you can make within a story, and the creative tactics made possible by the emergent gameplay. Second last is progression, also worth 15%. Progression has two parts: player progression and game progression. Player progression refers to character development through the game, for example, by unlocking new abilities in a skill tree. Then game progression is about having new content as you progress through the game, whether it be new map areas, new challenges, or incentives. Generally, just things that prevent the game from becoming stale as you spend time with it. A great example of progression in a game is Elden Ring. In Elden Ring, getting better is noticeable and feels very rewarding. Getting your ass kicked by something and then spending some time stomping lower level enemies to level up before going back for sweet, sweet revenge feels great. Also, each new area that you explore has its own personality, its challenges, and an increased difficulty, which keeps it from getting boring. And the last subcategory in gameplay is difficulty, also worth 15%. A game that's so easy that you're just sort of pasting everything in your way runs the risk of getting boring, whereas a game that's so difficult it feels unfair or even cheap can get very frustrating very quickly. It's really about finding the sweet spot in the middle, which God of War, both 2018 and Ragnarok, does excellently. The higher difficulties can be intensely challenging while still feeling masterable. You just have to get good and pay attention without needing to get good over, 2 days of fighting the same boss. Unless it's Sigrun in Give Me God of War. So yeah, that's the system that will be the basis for all of my ratings videos. If you're curious to see it in action, then feel free to like and subscribe, as they say. I'd also be interested to hear people's thoughts. What makes games enjoyable for you? What are the most important elements? Otherwise, thank you for watching. Have a nice day, and until next time.